Okay, thank you, Mo. So hi everyone, welcome to the Open Applied Linguistics Reading Club. It's our great honor that in our first Meet the Author series, we have Al-Hoorie and Hiver to talk about Metascience in Applied Linguistics. I'm today's host. I'm Xu Chen, the event coordinator at Open Applied Linguistics Research Network. Here's today's agenda. First, there will be an introduction to our reading club by Meng Liu, our convener of the research network. And then there will be an interview with the two authors. I will ask some questions on behalf of our readers. And then there will be a free Q&A session. So as we go along the way, please prepare your questions. And now let's welcome Meng to introduce our reading club.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Zhichun, for the introduction. And hello, everyone, and welcome again to our event. I'm Meng. I'm the co-convener of Open Applied Linguistics, and I'm really excited to introduce our Reading Club initiative to you. Now, for those of you who are new here, Open Applied Linguistics is an international research network affiliated with ILA, which is the International Association of Applied Linguistics. The core aim of our network, as the name suggests, is to promote open scholarship or open science or open research, whichever term you prefer, in applied linguistics. The network was established last year, and we held a 2-day online symposium on open scholarship in applied linguistics, which was received very positively by the audience. And this year, we're launching a few initiatives to further promote open scholarship. And this event you're attending now is part of the Open Applied Linguistics Reading Club initiative. Now, this is an exciting new venture for us, and we're eager to get started. The purpose of the Reading Club is to promote discussion on the essential readings related to open scholarship in applied linguistics. While open scholarship or open science has been more extensively discussed in our neighboring fields, such as psychology, in our own field, this is very much a new concept. It's not that people don't like this idea, but rather many people have simply never heard of this. So what we hope to achieve is to raise the awareness of open scholarship in applied linguistics through the Reading Club events so that more people could know about the ideas, the issues, the concepts related to this topic. Now, we have two types of events, the Meet the Author series and the Open Reader series. In Meet the Author series, we will invite the authors of the selected reading material to join us for an interview-like session, which is what we are doing today. We hope to have an overarching theme for our events, if possible, so that we can dive in on its topic more deeply. And the theme we've decided to focus on in our first few events is Metascience. And Ali and Phil's chapter is the perfect reading to kick off the series. I know metascience may be a new or somewhat unfamiliar concept to some of you, but hopefully by the end of this session, you will know more about this, and I hope you find it as inspirational as I do. Now, I don't want to take up too much time, so I won't go into every detail about the Reading Club. I highly recommend you to check out our website for more details, and as well as a lot of other good stuff on our website, such as the recordings of our symposium last year. Please also consider joining our network. The membership is free, but it would mean a lot for us to have your support. Again, everything you need can be found on our website, and please use the link to check out more if you're interested. Okay, so that's enough from me, and let me hand over to Xuechun again, and let's get started.
Yes, thank you, Mom. Again, we are so delighted that you are able to join us at our first attempt to hold this Reading Club event. Again, it's our great honor to have Al-Hoorie and Hiver to talk about a chapter on metascience in applied linguistics. Dr. Al-Hoorie is an associate professor from Saudi TESOL Association. His research interests include motivation theory, research methodology, and complexity. And Dr. Hiver is an associate professor at Florida State University. His research interests include student engagement, methodological innovation, and the contribution of complex dynamic system to language education. So as you can see from the pictures, the reading we are talking about today is a chapter from the book called Open Science in Applied Linguistics. This book will be published by John Badgemans with Luke Plonsky as the editor. Luke Plonsky is an associate professor of applied linguistics at Northern Arizona University. And this book, I highly recommend you because this is the first of its kind in our field to systematically introduce open science in applied linguistics. So let me stop sharing and let's get involved in the discussion. Let me start with a more general question about the theme. Alien Phil, could you tell us what is metascience and how is it different from open science?
Okay, thank you for having me in this session. So let's look at it this way. There are some researchers who study language learners, and they want to see how language learners go about learning the second language and whether it's effective or not, whether there are ways to improve the effectiveness of language learning. There are other researchers who are studying teachers, seeing how teachers teach, how they should teach, how to make teaching more effective. Now, the researchers who are studying learners and the researchers who are studying teachers, is their own research methodology good enough? Is their approach to doing research a valid approach? Who is going to study researchers now? Maybe researchers have biases. Maybe researchers engage in some practices that inadvertently invalidate their results or, make it less accurate. Who is going to study these researchers? Who is going to study the research process more generally? It doesn't have to be just researchers, maybe journals, maybe editors, maybe publishers, maybe other things and other players involved in the publication arena. So this is meta-science, so studying science and how science works. So this is meta-science. When it comes to open science specifically, now if you want to study science, you need to have access to many things involved in science, like the literature, like the way people behave, like things that happen in closed doors, in labs, in the data analysis and other things. You want to study it. So if it is not open, it will be hard to do meta-science. So it's, in many cases, open science is a prerequisite to be able to do meta-science. So maybe Phil can add something to it.
Sure. So just to build on what Ali's saying, meta-science is research about research. And that includes anything we can think of, ranging from systematic reviews and meta-analyses that take stock of the state of our knowledge, and that also explore the rigor of the methods that have been used. So it's different, as he's saying, from substantive questions that explore the effects of certain treatments or the outcomes of language learners. But this is incredibly important because we're only able to say with any certainty that we know what we know if it's based on solid science. So if the scholarship is at its core not rigorous, then there's something that's flawed with the conclusions that we think we have as a field. So it's a new conception of research, and people are still coming around to the idea that meta-science is genuine science, and this scholarship counts for something. Open science is a subset of meta-science, and I think it's related more to specific techniques and practices. And we can think of practices associated with open science, such as making our research more accessible, making it more reproducible. And we'll talk about a lot of these today. These specific practices are also bound up with ideology, because why would anyone want to make their research more transparent or accessible? As a field, we've got to sort of get on board with the underlying ethos of open science if we're going to engage in those practices.
Yes, and thank you for this clarification. And I really like the sentence that open science is the prerequisite of meta-science. In this chapter, you provide an overview of meta-science, and you specifically mention 5 areas related to this. And why don't we go through these 5 areas according to the order of the chapter? And let's start with the first one, methods. Can you tell us what do you mean by performing research openly and why is it important?
Sure, so maybe I can start. I was talking to someone the other day and they put it in a really interesting way. What are the expectations of researchers? A lot of what we do in the life cycle of research is in a black box, but we're not expecting researchers to use the most sophisticated methods, the most advanced analyses, or even to ask the right questions and make the right hypotheses. There is one basic expectation, and that is transparency, honesty about what we've done and why we did it. And so this first one, conducting research openly, has to do with throwing open the doors or opening that black box, and revealing what's going on behind the scenes in the life cycle of research. So we can think of everything we do from the start of conceptualizing a project, deciding on the materials to elicit data, collecting data, analyzing it, and reporting it. And conducting methods openly would be about not just revealing in a methods section, but really making part of the research project, almost like reporting on all the practices in the process of doing the research. Ali, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so the next logical question would be, why bother? Why make it open? You are, insinuating that something is wrong and we want to see it, which is pretty much true. So for many researchers, especially quantitative researchers, the goal is to get something significant in order to publish it. If you don't get something significant, then you will be very disappointed first. Then you will find to play around with the data. Oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should split the samples in this way. Maybe I should exclude that item and do the analysis again. Maybe I should do this and that. Finally, you get something significant. Then you write up that significant subset of the analyses and present it to the authors, to your readers, as a discovery. Now, this is called p-hacking, by the way. So you hack your p-value. So imagine, just to explain the idea, because this is kind of quantitative. Imagine that somebody pretends to be very skillful at, for example, basketball, and they can stand at the, in one side of the court, and they throw the ball and hit it right on. And they show you a video of them throwing the ball 100 times in a row, and each time it hits the target. You would say, wow, that's impressive. Now, what if you realize that there were also many times where that person did not hit the target, but these bits were cut out in the video? Now you will feel deceived. At the beginning, you thought that was a skillful player because you didn't see the full picture. But when you saw the full picture, you said, no, that wasn't true. You shouldn't delete these parts because we cannot form a judgment without seeing the whole picture. So, and if you repeat things over and over and over, you are going to hit the target by chance, even if you are not skillful. That's basic statistics. So there are many different ways of p-hacking. For example, as I said, doing the analysis differently, excluding some items, excluding some participants. Maybe there is an outlier here. Let's exclude that 2 or 3, maybe 4, maybe let's try 5 outliers, maybe 6 outliers, and redo the analysis every time. And then you find something significant. This falls under questionable research practices. Now, there are different ways to like in pre-registration and registered reports and other things to prevent this thing. But from a psychological perspective, there is something called motivated reasoning. So, because to put it simply, because you think something should be like this, then you come up with a valid justification so that you have that outcome. So, for example, you believe that the result should be in this direction, whether it's significant or whatever, then you don't get these results. You say, well, maybe I did something wrong. It cannot be, that big researcher found those results and published that big, highly cited study 20 years ago, and everybody has agreed that this should be the case. Now my results do not support that, finding. I must be the one who did something wrong. Let me change my analysis. Let me change my analysis. Now you are introducing bias.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just to pick up on that, there's a reason why this is all very important. The premise is that when we say something with certainty, for example, pronunciation instruction is effective with Cohen's d of 0.8. That effect size is an aggregate number based on all of these individual reports. If the individual reports are produced by individual researchers or teams, all of whom are operating on this trust me model with a black box of closed methods, we have no idea if that aggregate value can be trusted. In other words, we're basing our conclusions as a field collectively on these kind of maybe flawed individual metrics. And so it becomes really important to start adopting some of these practices like pre-registering upfront, saying what we plan to do with sampling and with the data analyses, so that we're not left to our own devices. And then, of course, trusting each individual researcher to not fall to these biases, right?
Yeah, I agree. And this is about openness at the early stage of doing research. We have to be honest and transparent. And let's talk about reporting, which is highly relevant to conducting research openly as well. Can you tell us what researchers should do to communicate research openly?
Bill, do you want to go or should I go?
Why don't you go first?
Okay, so basically communicating reports, communicating or reporting research openly, it means open access, basically. That's, a big part of it. And the problem with, many people have experienced this. You need a paper, you want to access it, then it asks you to pay like $35, for a paper that's like 10 pages or something. You can buy, a dozen books by, if you have, by this amount of money. So there is a long history for why science is closed at this level, financial reasons. Now, there are attempts to make science open access through what is called gold open access, which is where the author pays fees to make the paper open access. So it's not the reader who pays that $35 to read the paper, it's the author who has the paper accepted, pays an amount of money. Sometimes it's pretty hefty, like over $3,000, which is like more than 11,000 Saudi riyals, which is kind of expensive. Now, this is not a very good solution, because first, not everybody can afford to pay this money. Second, with this business model, there is an inherent conflict of interest. because most of these journals are for profit. They are not doing it, for the sake of it. These are, if you see Sage, if you see Wiley, if you see Elsevier, if you see any of these Benjamins, so the publisher of this book, all these are for-profit publishers, and at the end of the day, they want to make money. Now, if the author is paying money, if you reject that paper, here is the conflict of interest. You are potentially losing income. So there is a conflict of interest here. So the alternative business model is called diamond, not gold, diamond open access model, where nobody pays anything, neither the author nor the reader. And usually this is sponsored by a society, by a university, to make the whole process free. Now, the university or the society can get money from different strategies, but the publication process is not involved in this money-making business. Then there is a third model, which is green open access model. Before I go to green open access model, I will share the list of open access journals in the chat in Applied Linguistics. Green open access, where, just like this chapter that you are reading, this is considered green open access because it's the draft, the accepted draft, shared online, and many publishers are okay with this if you share your draft, the accepted version. Yeah, Phil, maybe you have something.
Sure. So I would say Ali's been talking about what are more kind of systemic issues with open reporting and these incentives that are not aligned in a way that individuals can generally default to open reporting. And I want to take it to a more individual level. When it comes to open reporting, there are some things that individuals can do to counter those systemic incentives that are against open reporting. Some of the things I'm thinking of here are things like open materials. That is, whenever we do research and ask substantive questions, part of that almost package of research is that we share our materials. How did we elicit data? What treatments were administered? What questionnaires were given? And the other would be open data, so that we say our conclusions are based on these data, these texts, these measures. Now, it's a little bit difficult for some people to accept that that should be shared openly. There's often a sense of being scooped or having others come to different conclusions based on those materials and those data, and maybe even those analyses. I think the mentality that we need to take is not one of competition, though. It is that we are entering a conversation with colleagues, coming to conclusions that are open to others' scrutiny. In other words, it's not take our word, this is the final word, but here's something that we think may be a plausible conclusion. Can anyone check it and back it up? So open reporting practices that include open materials, open code, open analyses, open data are the kind of things that can push reporting to be much more transparent, so that the conclusions we draw based on the research are also trustworthy.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to add, an important thing here. We cannot talk about, open access without talking about predatory publishing. And predatory journals are the ones that, basically they just want to take your money and publish your paper while pretending that there is a rigorous peer review process, but there isn't actually. They just want to publish whatever they receive in order to make profit. And this is damaging to science because, not everything should be published. So if you receive an email from a journal saying, we saw your article about this and that, and we would like to ask you to submit a paper to our journal, please, 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 don't respond to these emails. These are scams, and they just want to take your money, and these are not genuine journals.
Yeah, many readers tell us that open science reminds them of open access. And can you remind our readers of how can we evaluate the quality and trustworthiness of open access journals?
Well, evaluating the rigor of research more generally is a very complex process. You know, the main mechanism for evaluating the rigor of research is currently peer review. And when you hear peer review, or the reviewer said this, reviewer 2 didn't like my paper, you know, for some people, especially who are just starting in academia, they might have the image of a reviewer as somebody who graduated from a peer review academy, and they have received deep training about how to evaluate research and how to make a judgment about what should be published and what should not be published. When in reality, journals are so desperate to find reviewers to the extent that they want to, anybody, just please, can we have some papers? We are overwhelmed with submissions, please review for us. And so they send these review invitations to, you know, even to people who are only tangibly, their expertise is related to this journal, which is what Phil calls spray and pray, that you will find reviewers willing to review your paper, which is, you know, there is an irony here, because let's imagine that you are writing the method section of your paper, and the way you collected your data is something like this. So I went to work yesterday, you know, when I was collecting the data, and I saw my friend, and I asked her if I can ask you a few questions. She said, no, I'm busy. So I asked the other person, and he said, yeah, but quickly, I'm busy, and gave me a few answers. And then I asked this guy, and then that guy, and then I finally collected some data, and here's my data. So haphazard, so ad hoc, you know, no journal would accept this paper, especially if we know for sure that different participants would have given different answers. You know, very unsystematic. But here is the irony. This is how journals find reviewers. They, you know, have a database of reviewers who published, you know, previously at some point something somewhat related to your paper, and send them, you know, and keep their fingers crossed that they will accept, because they are too busy and they are unpaid, which is important. So they are not employed by the journal. So if they, you know, write rude reviews and they don't read deeply the paper and understand your point, they are anonymous. They have nothing to lose. So this is what's going to happen. So everybody is complaining about peer review. We can try to make peer review open by de-anonymizing the reviewers, but you can imagine the backlash that reviewers would be afraid of if they give negative reviews to authors, you know. But we could publish reviewer reports. Why not? Why should the review report be a secret and only the author and the editor see it? Why don't you put it in a supplementary material? It's very easy. So yeah, maybe Phil can add something, or I don't know.
Sure. So I think, you know, you'll see these as a kind of connected package of things. They cascade into each other. So open reporting and the idea that you would tell the whole story, the real story, rather than a neat story or a good story, is very important when it comes to evaluating the research. And we often think of evaluating as a quality control measure. So peer review, if a report passes peer review, it must be a good piece of research. The reality is that most submitted articles do eventually end up published. Nearly 100%, maybe not in the original journal they're submitted to, but they'll find a way to get out there. So that means that peer review isn't really quality control metric at all. It tends to be very capricious. It tends to be idiosyncratic. Sometimes reviewers have a personal vendetta against those topics or those researchers, right? So there are all kinds of biases in there. I think something that's important is to go back to the incentives that are built into publishing. Scholarly publishing is in a for-profit model. Even if it's open access, there are some of those incentives. Well, why is it that publishers stand to gain financially off of both authors as well as reviewers? Because reviewers are offering free labor, essentially. And so are the authors. So it seems to me that peer review is one thing that itself is a broken model. And although there are things we can do to make it more transparent, the system itself may be too flawed to really work in the way we intend it to work. So one of the things that some people have advocated for is for peer reviewers to be paid, which would hold them more accountable and make them less likely to be the reviewer too and attack the authors because they're unhappy with the topic or things like that.
Yes, thank you for bringing two areas together, that is reporting and evaluation together, and provide lots of possible directions for us to tackle some of the confusion and problems here. And let's jump back a bit more to reproducibility. You said that it's probably reproducibility is probably the clearest indicator of the need to embrace open science. Can you tell us what it is about, because our readers may not be very familiar with this term?
Okay, so when we talk about reproducibility and replicability and these terms, there are so many terms here in the literature, and different fields may have different terminology. But generally speaking, when we talk about, for example, computational reproducibility, it means that you have the data and you can reproduce the same results that the author got from the data. We should, right? That's a big problem if we don't. But we need to document the process, because there are a lot of steps in the process of getting the results. You analyze your items or whatever, you do this test, you present it this way, then you do that test. So if you have the data alone, it would be hard for another person to take the data and reproduce the same results. So there should be a code, ideally, an annotated code with a code book. And it's not easy to do this. If you have if you use R, for example, you can have the code there, but you need to have a code book, and you have to annotate, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, clearly, for somebody who is unfamiliar with your research can follow and reproduce the same results. There is robustness, for example, which is a related concept, which means that sometimes, and anybody who has done especially quantitative research might notice this, you have this result, whatever it is, you change a very small thing, and suddenly the result is no longer significant. Maybe you exclude one outlier, and the result is no longer significant, or the opposite. It's fragile sometimes. So robustness is about the ability to perform the analyses in slightly different ways, but you still get the same results, basically the same result in the same direction. You don't change your judgment. This means your results are robust. There is also replication, which is perhaps the most familiar term that people use. There is direct replication, which means that you have a study, you do the analysis again, you collect the data in the same way, do the analysis in the same way, and hope that you will get the same results. And success, you get the same results. And this is the first type of replication. The second type is partial replication. So if the first study did their research on, say, university students, you may ask, if I do this on high school students, will I get the same results? So you change one variable, and then see whether the results extend to that other level of that variable. And finally, there is conceptual replication. So you do the same, basically, that you test the same research question, but using a different methodology altogether. Then you see whether the results are an artifact of the methodology you used, or you still get the same result, more or less, using a different methodology. Now, I'm simplifying the process a lot, but there is, and I said success in air quotes, because how do you judge the success of a replication? Is it both the results are significant? Is it confidence intervals? Is it the direction effect sizes? Is it meta-analysis aggregation? Is it subjective judgment? There are different ways to judge, that you could make judgment about whether two studies replicate each other or not. And there is also the social aspect. Many people are uncomfortable when somebody else comes and tries to replicate their own research because they feel threatened. What if they don't get the same results as I did? This may question my study. Then they are bullying me. Why are you bullying me? Why are you repeating my own study? Now you are accusing me of incompetence, maybe of fraud. I didn't falsify the results. Why? So we get all sorts of problems here with replication. So it's a very complex, and we know this firsthand from our own research, that replication is very sensitive.
I would add something to that, and it has to do with the mentality we approach research questions with. Often we have this mentality of research is newness, originality, novelty. And if a replication is something that someone has already done, and we are doing it in a different way with new participants in a new context, it doesn't seem original. And we often award degrees based on original research. So originality is sort of built into our mentality of research. Replication, however, is not this idea of knowing a little about a lot, but rather, can we go more in depth? Can we verify the things we think we know and establish that these hold across contexts with many participants in many social geographic areas? So getting out of that mentality of needing to do something novel for it to count as research and be publishable is something that's challenging. But of course, there are some great initiatives in our field. Some journals are leading the way. For example, language teaching has a dedicated section all about replications. So the idea is that gradually we're coming around to valuing replication per se as a form of research that has value for the field and can add to the certainty of our knowledge.
So I want to add one more follow-up about this. So I would imagine that some listeners might be a bit puzzled about this idea of replication, saying, why do you want to do the same study again? Who would want to do that? Isn't science and research about finding something new, doing something that somebody didn't do before, nobody has done before? And, some people go and, when they think of a research topic, they go and look online, and they may see that, oh, an MA student 15 years ago did something similar to this. So, oh, it's no longer new. I can't do it. I have to find something else. But if you do a study, the same study again, and you get different results, there is something for us to learn here. What's going on? It's complex. Something's going on that we need to understand. And unfortunately, the reality is, although as Phil said, there are some journals who proactively support replication research, for example, by having a dedicated section in their journal for replication. Some journals and researchers look down upon replication because they think that, research means you have to do something new and discover something new. To some extent, this is true. But the backside is, if if we do this, we will create, let's say, an incentive structure that favors innovation over verification. So we know that not everything we read is right, but how do we know which finding is something that we can trust and which finding that we cannot trust? So we need at least to devote part of our resources to verification.
Yeah, and I think what you have talked about really answers the questions of why should we care about rewarding open research, and it's a system issue. But I was wondering, among the 5 areas you discuss in this chapter, which do you think has received the least attention in the field of applied linguistics specifically, and which one is the most challenging to achieve in our field?
I don't know, maybe evaluation, I would say. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think maybe evaluation or the incentives. So for one, evaluating research is something that not many people think about every day. It's usually the realm of editors and peer reviewers. And when it comes to incentives, we can think of professional associations, editorial boards, funding mechanisms. These are those kind of more macro structures that have policies, even if they are implicit policies, that do or don't encourage open practices, open science practices. Now, the fact that a lot of our research is done in a kind of creative way by individuals or teams who are not liaising with funders, editorial boards, and professional associations means that the research is completed and then it confronts those lacks of incentives or barriers. So I think that's one of the things that our field has to start thinking of. Are there a few more top-down mechanisms that we can put in place that change the incentive structures or that help to deliberately encourage research teams to do open science in a way that is not going to subtract from the process or be too onerous for them? And I think we've only just begun to explore those things in our professional associations.
So when we talk about incentives, anybody who is a practicing researcher would realize that what does a successful researcher means? First, publish, or perish. That's a very familiar notion. Publish in high impact journals. If you publish in low quality journals or non-indexed journals, that doesn't count. Get a lot of citations. Now, if you have these 3 trifecta, then you are an established researcher in your field. But where is the rigor part of it? Well, are your findings replicable? Well, I published a lot, so yeah, so the incentive structure now favors publishing a lot and getting citations a lot in high impact journals. And you might think that, oh, this journal is an indexed journal with an impact factor of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20. But impact factors are just an equation based on citations, really. Even self-citations, really, as easily manipulable, very fragile indicator of the quality of the journal, and can easily be skewed. One paper receiving a lot of citations can increase the impact factor of the whole journal, even if the other papers in that journal are of low quality. So do not think that an impact factor is the ultimate quality assurance measure of a journal.
Yeah, thank you for... Yeah.
Sorry, just thinking about some of our colleagues' work, and they frame these open science practices from an ethical perspective. And the idea is that researchers often don't consider this, but they have a moral obligation. We're partly the producers of science. We're also consumers of it. And what we do is we tend to produce science for certain stakeholders who are not part of the conversation. If there is an ethical obligation we have to those other stakeholders, is to do things in a way that is completely transparent so that there is a level of trustworthiness in the results. Otherwise, everything falls down. So the things that Ali is talking about in terms of incentives, they do seem a bit out of our reach because they are at a more macro level. But I think what we shouldn't do is throw our hands up and say, well, we can't change the system, and therefore we're going to go about doing things business as usual. And it's funny because there's this, I don't know who it was, maybe it was Gandhi, who said things like, we all want to change the world, but we're very reluctant to change ourselves, the way we do things. So often change does start with those little practices that we can enact. And over time, there's this kind of growing consensus that, yes, there needs to be a change in the way we do things, whether that's from the planning stages all the way through reporting and evaluating the research. And those are things individuals can do, which will then result in the more systemic levels sitting up and taking notice of what's going on at a grassroots level. And our associations will then say, look what's happening, we've got to change or we'll be left behind. So I think that's a powerful way of changing things. And especially with these last two, evaluating and then incentives, we can't wait for them to change. We've got to sort of be the change to push them into the future. If those associations won't come, we've got to pull them kicking and screaming into the future with us.
Yeah, thank you for this clarification and elaboration on these questions about the chapter and the reading. And I guess Meng have one question on behalf of our network.
Yeah, thank you, Xuechun. So this has been really thought-provoking and interesting. I guess I'll just ask, because you've mentioned so many concepts, so many problems, so many sort of unresolved issues. And you also, I really agree with your point, we can't just change from the top down. We have to do it from bottom up as well. And that's, I guess, where we as a network comes in. So we're sort of a grassroots network, and we can sort of start motivating individual researchers and to start, making changes. But I wonder if you have any sort of suggestions for us, in everything you've discussed, is there anything that we should prioritize, and or any ways that we can do it to sort of expedite the process so that we get to the future we want sooner? Yeah.
Postprint. So I think one of the most easily tackled challenge, and one that I feel has the most impact, is promoting the idea of a postprint, because it's legal. It raises the level of equality and diversity in the people who read our research, and accessibility to people in different parts of the world. So have these people contribute to the conversation. And when more and more people start talking about this conversation, then we can have a more diverse set of solutions to problems we have.
I think to add to that, there would be a series of small changes. And these are just small tweaks we can make to the things we already do. For example, reporting research doesn't begin once the research has already been conducted in the writing up stage. Reporting research can begin with the planning. We report what we plan to do. We pre-register, and it doesn't take much more time than normal planning of a research protocol. We would just register that somewhere so that others can have access to it. And then when we share our research, we share the network of materials that come with it and make it coherent. What instruments, what data elicitation measures, what data, and how is it analyzed, so that people can make better sense of the research and come to greater certainty about the conclusions the research has.
Yes, thank you for the great suggestions. I totally agree. I think even though open science or meta science, they contain these are sort of umbrella terms that are associated with millions of different terms and concepts, which can seem daunting or overwhelming. But I think we can all start small. There is not sort of it's sorry, I got stuck. Yeah, so you can just start small, and every step counts. So I think, yeah, by starting to share your accepted manuscripts, And if you're feeling even bolder, you can even share your preprints. That's the version before peer review, so that you can get some feedback from the community, hopefully. And also by doing other like sort of incremental changes that can build up, and so that we can really have this cultural shift and towards greater transparency and openness. Yeah, and I think now is probably a great time to open up the floor to the participants. And I think we are already getting a few comments in the chat, so we can look at the chats and have our free Q&A session. I think we can also stop the recording now, so that the participants can
Sure.
speak freely. Yeah.